them today at 1-877-8-TANKER. That's 1-877-8-TANKER.
From the heart of Central Florida, you're listening to the most electrifying show in media. A Neighbor's Choice. And I'm your host, your neighbor, David Granosky. So glad to be with you again, live across FM and AM podcasts and video stream. We're happy to have this time with you as we listen to that beautiful music. Go ahead and turn it right back up as we get ready for another exciting edition of A Neighbor's Choice, where we're going to look at the news like nobody else does. We're going to look at all of the headlines in the world of finance and economics. That's in our second hour. But in this hour, we're going to turn to something that you've come to learn a lot about on this program with some of the guests that we have on, as well as our podcast on aneighborschoice.com. And that is the subject of the failure of the U.S. food pyramid, the failure of what I call single-payer nutrition science. And that's why we don't want to have anything to do with single-payer healthcare, because single-payer healthcare cannot fix what single-payer nutrition broke, which is our bodies, our immune system, our mitochondrial health. All that stuff we'll have to understand together is a product of the arrogance of human beings monopolizing what is called science today, and what is reality, way more political science than it is science. And so there's an attack on good, healthy, holistic eating. There's an attack on an essential thing, which is eating meat. I saw a screenshot today before the program began of apparently one of the proposals by the Biden administration, where they are saying they want you to eat less meat. Surprise, surprise. They don't want you to eat so much meat. And they say they want to cut 90% of red meat from diet. They want a maximum of 4 pounds per year, 1 burger per month. That's a quarter-pounder patty too, by the way. And that's stretching it. They'd rather you have, a 1/5 patty. But, they'll take, so they want you to have 4 pounds of beef per year. But they probably want you to have pounds of vegetable oils per month. That's the problem with these anti-science folks that want to plan out the world for us and tell us what's healthy. And in fact, they've given us the exact opposite advice that we need to be taking into consideration. So joining me now for a fun, wide-ranging discussion is our good friend and person who really gets into the weeds of the vegetable oils, the seed oils, plant-based oils, if you're into marketing language. We have with us Tucker Goodrich. How you doing, Tucker?
I am very good, David. How are you? Pleasure to be back.
Yeah, it's great having you back here in beautiful Central Florida. You're joining us from parts unknown in Idaho. Is it is it still cold?
But slightly chilly Idaho, and we've got some snow in the forecast over the weekend.
Everybody doing okay over there?
Everybody's doing great. Thank you.
Well, there's a blog that you published today that we can use as kind of the starting point. And, we won't, read it all here, but, just to kind of start it off, it says how the food industry implemented the dietary guidelines. On being challenged on the incompleteness of the science, Senator McGovern said senators do not have the luxury that the research scientist does of waiting until every last shred of evidence is in. That was a quote from the U.S. Senate Select Committee on Nutrition and Human Needs, which ultimately led to the U.S. dietary guidelines under which we continue to live. You start off.
Yes, that's exactly right. And the dietary guidelines, like most of these government programs, The name doesn't quite describe what actually happens. Like the Affordable Care Act didn't actually bring in affordable care. These guidelines weren't meant to be guidelines. And what I talk about in this post is an account from the food industry of the lengths that they had to go through and some of the problems that they had implementing the guidelines over a 30-year period, right?
Right.
Now, what's important to understand is that far from being guidelines, these are obligatory for the military, for school programs, for a lot of hospital food programs. You have to feed people according to the dietary guidelines, right? You do not have a choice. Now, not coincidentally, we have, the dietary guidelines were originally implemented to help control what was then seen as an obesity epidemic, which is pretty ironic because if you go back and you look at photographs of the average American from 1977, they weren't really all that fat by today's standards. And indeed, after the guidelines were implemented, the obesity epidemic really kicked into high speed, which I think was kind of an expected consequence. The American Medical Association's response to these guidelines was, quote, "The evidence for assuming that benefits are to be derived from the adoption of such universal dietary goals is not conclusive, and there is potential for harmful effects," which has to be one of the bigger understatements ever to come out of a government program.
Right.
We're now looking at a country where at least 88% of the population is metabolically unhealthy, where we have huge epidemics of obesity and diabetes and, potentially related cancers. I think it is safe to say from looking at the evidence that the dietary guidelines have failed by every means of measuring them. Now, what's really ironic about this is this was George McGovern's personal project. McGovern was a good man. He was like a lot of these folks. He was very well-intentioned. He finally got out of government and tried to open a hotel up in Connecticut, where I used to live. And the hotel failed in large part because of excessive regulation. And he wrote back in 1992, he wrote a great editorial for the Wall Street Journal in which he said, "The problem we face as legislators is, where do we set the bar so that it is not too high to clear? I don't have the answer. I do know that we need to start raising these questions more often." Well, unfortunately, that was quite a long time after he had foisted these dietary guidelines on us. And we continue to live under them until today, largely unchanged.
Yeah, and now they call it My Plate, right, instead of a food pyramid.
Well, My Plate is how they sell it to people. Yeah,
right.
It's still the dietary guidelines, and there's still, the USDA implements this, and they operate by 5-year plans. Anybody who's familiar with the history of the Soviet Union will find that rather ironic. 5-year food plans in the Soviet Union didn't work out all that well, let's say, with some understatement. And I don't know why anybody would want to choose that here. But nevertheless, every 5 years, they revisit the dietary guidelines, and they largely ignore any new science that's come out. It's gotten so bad that Congress actually has required them to do a better job of following the science, which, as McGovern stated at the beginning, they were not doing. And they still continue to just largely, ignore the science and just push a lot of their own agendas. One of the fellows who was put on the 2020 Dietary Guidelines Committee is a self-described food missionary for the Seventh-day Adventist Church, who, of course, advocates a vegetarian diet, which is absolutely fine if that's how they choose to live. And, the Adventists, there are a lot of health advantages for the Adventists to also avoid smoking and drinking. But why on earth is a self-described food missionary for a church sitting on the dietary guidelines of the United States Advisory Committee.
Mm-hmm.
How does that make any sense? I mean, I'm not an Adventist. I don't want to be forced to follow their religious views.
Right. And yet that's what we have. So that's where, and they still have kind of an influence in the way things are shaped with the food guidelines, right? Or is that? Well,
the entire, the field of dietitian was started by the Adventist Church by an associate, I think her name was Leona Cooper, who was an associate of Dr. Kellogg, the fellow who invented Kellogg's cereals to make people ill. He was hoping that eating these breakfast cereals would cut down on people's sex drives, which is generally a symptom of malnutrition. She literally founded the field of dietitian and was one of the major influences in the founding of the field of nutrition science in the United States.
Yeah.
And to this day, they still have an annual dinner in her honor, where they, recognize who in their industry is doing the best job of promoting the field of dietitian and doing the work of dietitians, which by their own description is basically trying to convince everybody to follow the dietary guidelines, even though they're not a government agency.
Yeah, that's interesting. And yet so they have a particular interpretation, a sacred interpretation that they have, and that's been at the foundation of what we have as food guidelines today. You have a quote here. Is this from the this is, you said it's the Evil Empire Food Division. This is from the
this is a report that was apparently back in 2010. The food industry and the dietitians got together to discuss. It was the American Dietetic Association, which is now known as, I think, the Academy of Dietetics, the Institute of Food Technologists, who are the scientists who are responsible effectively for instituting the dietary guidelines, as one will learn in reading this account. And then the, International Food Information Council and the International Life Science Institute, which is basically a organization that is funded by the food industry to promote, processed food products.
Right.
So these groups got together to discuss, where they were and what they needed to do and what the problems were back in 2010 after 30 years, right? And it is one of the most eye-opening and appalling things, so here's how they describe these guidelines right at the beginning. So guideline, right? Guideline to me means here's a good idea, you should follow it. Right? Okay, fine. If they want to publish these guidelines and say you should all follow it, that's great. I mean, I don't agree with them, but at least it's just a guideline. How they describe this in practice is a coordinated strategic plan that includes all sectors of society, including individuals, families, educators, communities, physicians, and allied health professionals, public health advocates, policymakers, scientists, and small and large businesses, e.g. farmers, agricultural producers, food scientists, food manufacturers, and food retailers of all kinds should be engaged in the development and ultimate implementation of a plan to help all Americans eat well, be physically active, and maintain good health and function.
So
basically
that was Thomas Jefferson, right? That said that you were quoting?
Yeah, exactly. So although, back after the McGovern Committee prompted the American Medical Association to say the evidence for assuming that benefits are to be derived from the adoption of such universal dietary goals is not conclusive, and there is potential for harmful effects. Unfortunately, everybody fell in line. All the doctors, all the physicians, if you go see a doctor today and you ask them for dietary advice, physicians aren't trained in medical school in nutrition, right? They may get they may get several hours of nutritional training, which is, rather ironic. If you go see your vet, one of the first things they'll ask you about your dog is, what does he eat, right? But doctors don't do that. A doctor will send you to a dietitian, which was basically founded by a member of a, albeit very successful, religious cult,
right?
The Seventh-day Adventists,
Yeah.
Who see as part of their religious mission, the Adventists are very successful and they do a lot of good work. I'm not going to, I don't want to demonize them in any way. They're the second largest operator of hospitals on planet Earth after the Catholic Church.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And they train lots of doctors are trained by the Adventists. So they do a lot of good work. But and if that was all they were doing, I would say God bless them and good luck to them. The problem is when the federal government starts taking up their attitude and implementing it by law onto all of us, in my view.
Right. That's going to have some problems.
As happens.
Yeah, accidents are going to happen. Let's take a quick break and return with Tucker Goodrich as we unpack how the government subsidized the wrong foods, promoted the wrong foods, continues to promote the wrong foods with the dietary guidelines, and what we can do about it. We'll be back after this short break.
Who is your neighbor? Dave and Wally are team drivers for Oakley Transport. One day, they came across a very serious accident on the highway. Some might pass on by, but Dave and Wally saw there was no time to waste. They jumped into action and saved 2 people's lives with moments to spare. That's the kind of courageous love we need more of today. It reflects the respected culture Oakley Transport develops with their driving professionals. CDLA licensed drivers. Join Oakley Transport today for a rewarding career. Visit oakleytransport.com. That's oakleytransport.com. Hello, this is David Gronowski with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a 6th-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida. Or go to whiteoakpastures.com and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR. Are you ready to transform your career? Jess Smith was too. She was stuck on a job that was controlling her life, consuming her free time, and offering little opportunity for growing her pay. Then she found FinTech Mortgage Association, and she never looked back. FinTech Mortgage Association makes home lending simple, and they take care of home buyers like family. Using technology to make everyone's life easier, FinTech Mortgage Association equips each of their loan solutions architects with the tools they need to build a career with a schedule they control, a product they can take pride in, and an earning potential that is life-changing. Unleash your true potential. Join FinTech Mortgage Association. Visit finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com. You're in charge now. NMLSID 1492187. Equal housing lender.
Join Fight TV and SportsTalkFlorida.com live to see the Firestone Grand Prix and St. Pete pre-race show. Host include Art Edmonds, Eric Casillas, Viorica Bruni, and Mike Straka. Guests include NTT IndyCar drivers Graham Rahal, Pato Award, Joseph Newgarden, and more. Celebrities from film, food, movies, and TV. Live Sunday morning, April 25th at 10 a.m. on Fight TV and SportsTalkFlorida.com. Plus, hear it live right here on AM 820, 96.7 FM Tampa, and 98.3 FM Pinellas.
A Neighbor's Choice is live. I'm your host, David Gronowski. I do want to give a shout out to Tho Bishop of the Mises Institute, who was kind enough to fill in for me yesterday as we were out of the studio, but it was he did a great job and had a small window of a notice, and he did a phenomenal job filling in for us live on A Neighbor's Choice yesterday. So I want to give him a shout out and thanks to that. for that. And as well as I want to promote, again, our new Things Hidden film will be out this tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you want to watch a fascinating discussion, a kind of exploration of history and anthropology around the campfire, you don't want to miss it. On our YouTube channel, it'll debut, or our website, aneighborschoice.com. You can watch the premiere at 8 p.m. Eastern tonight. You'll like it. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I look forward to seeing what you think about it. So we return now with Tucker Goodrich for a little short segment here, Tucker, as we set up for the news. But I just wanted to kind of let you continue. So obviously these food pyramid guidelines continue to cause a lot of problems, and we're going to get into some of the specifics of it. But again, what was going on here? Is this a matter of giant corporations that have a lot of interests and grains and so forth, wanting to make sure that their products have a nice foundational place in the marketplace?
No, it really wasn't. Apparently, one of McGovern's key advisors was himself an Adventist, and he was kind of, he was doing what Adventists do, which is push their dietary views as a way to help save people's souls. There was some corporate involvement in the dietary guidelines, but ironically, it was largely the meat industry pushing back against them, trying to make them much less vegetarian than what the, committee initially wanted them to do. So basically, industry's role in this was pushing against it, and it was the meat industry which was pushing against it. God bless them for doing so. I mean, again, I believe that, if you want to pursue this way of eating, you should be free to do so, but I should be free to opt not to. As I choose not to. So at any rate, just to go quickly onto the sort of influence that this point of view has, there was one of the more appalling cases I've heard of recently. There was a orthopedic surgeon down in Australia, Gary Fettke, who came, he's an orthopedic surgeon. A large part of an orthopedic surgeon's work is unfortunately amputating the limbs of diabetics, right? Because what happens when you're diabetic is you start getting circulatory problems. Ultimately, you'll get gangrene in, say, your feet, and then they're going to have to cut off your foot or your leg. And this was a large part of his practice. And he came to realize that if he told diabetics to eat less carbohydrates and less sugar, that he could potentially, and it's been shown, head off these diabetic complications. And he would rather do that than cut people's limbs off, which you would think would be an amazingly commendable thing for a doctor to be doing, right?
Yeah.
So his wife, Belinda, found out later that it was the Adventists in Australia who tried to take his medical license away, and he was ultimately sanctioned by the medical board down in Australia for, and I quote, inappropriately curing diabetes. And he was banned from ever giving dietary advice to his patients, even if, and they were explicit about this, even if the approach that he was pursuing was found to be valid, he was still banned from talking to his patients about this.
Let's hold that thought. We'll pick that up after this quick news break. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm David Gronowski here with Tucker Goodrich. We'll learn more about what happened to Gary Fettke when we return.
There is all kinds of lunacy going on.
Yes.
The madness of 2020.
Weekdays 11 to 2.
I'm just so fed up with these Democrats. It's unbelievable.
Get it straight from Chris Plant.
They're so hypocritical. It makes me sick.
It's the Chris Plant Show.
This has just got me going off.
And the left is waging war against the police in the United States.
Telling it like it is.
You should be thanked profusely for getting to the point. You're a voice of reason in the sea of idiots.
The Chris Plant Show. Weekdays 11 to 2. News Talk 1040 WHBO.
A CDC advisory panel has been meeting all day, reviewing 15 cases now of confirmed blood clot cases out of the nearly 8 million doses of Johnson & Johnson vaccine administered in the U.S. All those cases involve women, and 3 reportedly died. The panel will rule if there's a link to the J&J vaccine or any potential increased risks. They could decide whether to lift a pause on that vaccine later today. In New Hampshire, Vice President Kamala Harris speaking to electrical union workers today about the president's infrastructure plan, telling them the White House is ready to invest more in vocational and technical training programs to keep America on the cutting edge of jobs.
In the American Jobs Program, we have $100 billion going to workforce development programs.
Education Secretary Miguel Cardona holding a roundtable today with students. Earlier, his department announced plans to distribute $800 million to help students experience in homelessness. Funding from the American Rescue Plan. Michelle Franzen, ABC News.
A Neighbor's Choice Radio is back. And we're speaking with Tucker Goodrich, who is the host of the blog yelling-stop.blogspot.com, where he gets into healthy lifestyle, barefoot running, healthy diets, and moving in the right direction. I wanted to return to your story about Gary Fettke, right, in Australia? Or is it Australia?
Australia. So Dr. Fettke's case ultimately went to the Australian Parliament. And shortly after he gave testimony, he was asked to testify. The Australian Medical Board issued a censure of him, basically slapping him down for having the audacity to go talk to his elected representatives. Luckily, in his case, Parliament finally slapped down the Australian Medical Board and said that, you know, what they had done to him was inappropriate, and he was completely vindicated and allowed to go back to practicing medicine for the benefit of his patients, which is what any doctor should be doing. So anyway, that case turned out well, but it shows you that was only one of several cases of prominent physicians. Tim Noakes in South Africa was another one who were slapped down by people who have a particular dietary view. There were, Noakes had a 2-year-long trial that in South Africa that completely vindicated what he said. And of course, he's never had any apology from the dietetics group in South Africa who pursued him for those 2 years. Anyway, but back to this. So that, this is ongoing. This has been ongoing for several years. There was another case in Sweden where they tried to take a doctor's medical license away for trying to advocate a healthier diet to her patients. But anyway, back to what happened in the United States. This is a Richard Black, a nutrition scientist at Kraft, talking about this program. He said, recommending dietary change that is so extreme as to be only aspirational rather than achievable will not serve the greater public need for dietary guidance to address the obesity epidemic. After all, we are asking people to fundamentally change how they think about food, shop for food, prepare food, and eat food. This will take time, patience, commitment, and trust from everyone, right? This poor guy was probably sealed in carbonite after he said that in this committee. Because we have the academic view, Penny Chris Etherton, a PhD from Penn State, basically advocates brainwashing people to get them to comply with the dietary guidelines. She says, quote, cognitive behavioral strategies have proved effective in behavior change. Notable among these is motivational interviewing with its well-ordered feedback and monitoring. I mean, this is what, when I was growing up, this is what we were afraid of in the United States. Yeah. That was the movie, The Manchurian Candidate, was based on a guy who was brainwashed into doing something that somebody else thought he ought to do. And now we have these professional organizations advocating brainwashing the United States public to follow this particular dietary point of view. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah. So they can't all be Seventh-day Adventists, right? Christianity is not, in any of its forms, is not very fashionable amongst, the scientific elite and government and so forth. So what's driving this? It's just momentum that they don't understand the roots of?
It's momentum. They don't understand the roots of it. I mean, I've had conversations on Twitter with dietitians, and when I explain to them the basis of their profession, they get irate, right? And I mean, I'll quote the history from the Academy of Dietetics back to them. And when they say this woman has no influence, Cooper has no influence anymore, I'll say, well, then why do you have a dinner in her honor every year, right? If she's been repudiated, which I don't know if she needs to be repudiated, but, clearly she has a lot of influence if you're having a dinner in her honor in an era where we're, tearing down statues of the founding fathers. That's gotta mean that they really believe in what she was trying to do, right? And it explains why there are so many vegetarians and vegans coming out of dietetics academies. That's what they're taught is the healthiest way of eating, despite very, let's just say there's not a scientific basis for that point of view.
Yeah. And so how did vegetable oils get subsidized so much? Did it come from the food pyramid stuff, the guidelines, or did it come before that, or parallel to that and another industry push into government? Or how did they become, you got monocrops, the corn, everything's corn based in America. You got soybean oil, you got all this stuff. These big giant monocrops are a big part of both the Republican and Democratic establishment. You know what I mean? As these big giant farm companies.
Yeah, vegetable oils, I mean, obviously, if you're an Adventist and you're looking to cook, you don't want to use animal fats, so you need some alternative, right? So they've long been big supporters of cooking with vegetable oils. It's interesting that a lot of them are of the belief that fat alone is harmful for you. So ironically, they often will advise people to go on a low-fat diet, which means that, as we've seen in some studies, people who follow that way of eating actually wind up eating a lot fewer vegetable oils than the average American does. And they get quite healthier quite quickly when they do that. There was a study that Kevin Hall of the National Institutes of Health did recently that showed that people on a low seed oil, low animal product diet lost a lot of weight quite quickly. I would argue, of course, it was because of the seed oils, because the other group ate several times more seed oils than the group that was on the plant-based diet. Plant-based is basically a euphemism for vegan or vegetarian. And, when Procter & Gamble originally started marketing Crisco back in 1911, this was right after a book had been published, The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, who was a socialist journalist and a bit of a rabble-rouser. It was a somewhat extravagant account of the meat industry in Chicago and the conditions in the plants there, a lot of which was just fictionalized, but it made people really amenable to this quote unquote laboratory fat that was clean and modern and made from nothing but plants with no worries about the conditions in a butcher's factory, in a butchery in Chicago. So, and then it didn't hurt that it was cheaper back in an era where, the big question was, are we going to focus on making guns to fight World War I or butter to feed our soldiers? Crisco was an answer to that. It was, hey, we can feed them on this new scientific product,
right? That
Crisco claimed was healthy.
And for those who, we talk about this in different ways in the past, but for those who are, when we have broadcast audience, people come in and new people come in all the time. What is the basic problem with consuming these vegetable oils, which have become so ubiquitous in our diets today? They're found in almost all the restaurant foods and processed foods, and it's found in the chicken and pork fat that people eat a lot of when they eat the chicken and the pork meats. But
right,
what What's the big problem with that for those who are new to this concept of vegetable oils or seed oils, and what's wrong with them?
Well, there's a great, as I think we've discussed before, there's a great parallel between vegetable oils and smoking, right? Smoking, obviously, everybody knows, is bad for you. One of the reasons that it's bad is because when you smoke, you inhale a chemical called acrolein, which is extremely toxic to humans. And that's thought to be one of the reasons why smoking causes lung cancer. Now, it turns out that seed oils also break down into this exact same chemical. And it turns out that if you cook with seed oils, this is a big problem in China, and this has been known since the 1980s. Chinese women who never smoke are very susceptible to getting lung cancer, and it's because they're cooking with these seed oils, right? Now, unfortunately, this process of seed oils breaking down into toxins doesn't only happen when you cook with them, it also happens when you consume them. And they break down in the normal course of business in your body into a variety of chemicals, some of which are known to be mutagenic, meaning they damage your DNA. One of these chemicals is known to preferentially damage the P53 anti-cancer gene, which is one of the most common genetic mutations found in cancers. And there's a lot of, animal experiments looking at breast cancer have found that it's required that you use seed oils in the diets for these animals to induce breast cancer. So there's a variety of different ways how these seed oils are thought in the scientific literature to cause harm to humans. I mean, LDL, which your doctor will tell you your LDL is too high and that's a problem. Well, it turns out it's been known since the 1980s that LDL is only harmful when you eat too much seed oils, and it can break down into what they call oxidized LDL. In fact, the marker that's used to track this oxidized LDL, which is thought to be what's actually causing the progression into atherosclerosis and cardiovascular disease, the markers that they use are oxidized seed oils to track the progression of oxidized LDL throughout your body.
And it's also, as Peter Dobromilski said on my show, it's also linked to the problem with obesity, right? The seed oils.
Yes. Seed oils, Peter and I have slightly different views on how this happens, but we both agree on the end conclusion, which is don't eat seed oils. One of the ways that seed oils cause obesity is they activate what's known as the endocannabinoid system, right? I mean, not everybody, but a lot of people have heard that if you smoke pot, you get the munchies, right? You want to eat, and you don't want to eat steak. You want to eat, a bag of Doritos, the whole bag. Well, it turns out the chemical THC that makes you high when you smoke pot also makes you want to eat. And in fact, THC is prescribed it's a prescription drug, and it's prescribed to people with HIV who don't want to eat to make them want to eat, right? Now, that chemical is similar to a chemical that's produced in your body called anandamide, which makes rats want to eat, right? And the treatment, there's another drug called rimonabant that blocks your body being able to take up THC and anandamide and these other endocannabinoids. And it was sold in the 2000s as a weight loss drug. So there's this, basic, very well described process in medicine and the scientific literature for, these seed oils causing obesity. In fact, the most common solution that a doctor has if he has a patient who needs to gain weight, if your parents go into the hospital and they're elderly and they're all underweight, your doctor is going to prescribe Ensure to them. And the active ingredient in Ensure, as has been shown in the animal experiments, are seed oils. Ensure is basically seed oils and sugar. So it's like junk food on steroids, and it makes you fat. That's why doctors give it to people.
Wow. And now, Peter's theory, Peter Dobromilski, has a different theory about what causes obesity, right? With the seed oils?
Well, Peter's theory and my theory are very complementary, and I think they're both working at the same time. So Peter's theory is that, and there's a lot of evidence in the scientific literature, again, that he's right, is that the seed oils alter how your mitochondria function on a fundamental level, and that it alters how your body stores fat away, and it promotes this fat storing phenotype in your body, right? And there seems to be evidence that that's, basically in the chain of cause and effect here, you eat seed oils, it produces this chemical anandamide that makes you want to eat more, and then the seed oils go into your mitochondria and alter the way your mitochondria work in a way that makes you store more fat. And I think that's, there's a couple other mechanisms along those same lines that I won't even get into here because we have limited time. But, Peter's view and my view are very complementary. I think what he's saying is right. I just think there's more to the story than his story.
Yeah, that's interesting. So there's multiple pathways that these seed oil consumption are causing obesity, right? In other words,
that's correct.
Yeah. And so, and again, a lot of people in the keto space and the carnivore space and so forth that you are friends with would say, no, it's actually carbs and sugar that's causing, it's just eating the carbs and the sugar that spikes the insulin, right? Which creates an immune, a drop in your immune system, and it causes you to want to store on fat and so forth and so on and so forth. Is there a problem with that assumption, or is that just not the full story?
Yeah, I think so. There's a scientist up at Yale, and he has a mechanism whereby he can make humans insulin resistant in a couple of hours. And he doesn't do it by feeding them carbohydrates. He does it by injecting soybean oil into their veins. And the pathway that he's described is directly stimulated by the fats that are in these seed oils in the body. And there are several studies also in humans showing that if you lower the amount of seed oils people are consuming, that not only do they lose weight, but they become less insulin resistant, and their HbA1c goes down, and it doesn't matter what their carbohydrate intake is. I mean, one of these studies used an 80% carb diet, and just by reducing the amount of seed oils in their diet, they were able to make people significantly better.
And
now that said, if you are diabetic, the fastest way to get better is to cut out the carbohydrate intake, because, today you are unable to process carbohydrates, and you should not, the quickest way to resolve that problem, of course, is to cut back on your carbohydrate consumption.
And the seed oil consumption at the same time.
And
right?
the seed oil consumption at the same time. That's correct.
We're speaking,
in my opinion, of course.
Yeah, this is just, we're looking at the science, trying to make, as best a commentary on the science that Tucker Goodrich and others have been trying to make sense for the general public as these papers come out and the data comes out over the years. We're going to take a break and return. When we return, I want to ask Tucker about this new, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's this association of red meat consumption and heart disease that it's the European Society of Cardiology. They put out a 20,000 individuals observational study, and they say there's a problem there. So we'll just see if you have any comments on that when we take a break and return.
David Gronowski here. Let me tell you about a man named Gabriel. Every day, Gabriel puts on his boots and drives across America to make sure our store shelves stay stocked with the food people count on. See, Gabriel served our country overseas. He knows that America stands for freedom, quality, and caring for others the way we would like to be treated. That's why when Gabriel saw food shelves getting low during the pandemic, he hit the road as a driver with Oakley Transport. In the land of the free, where no one should go hungry, we need heroes like Gabriel to help keep America fed. CDLA driving professionals. Join Oakley Transport today. Keep America fed. Visit oakleytransport.com or call them today at 1-877-8-TANKER. That's 1-877-8-TANKER. Hello, this is David Gronowski with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a 6th-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com, and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR.
Are you ready to transform your career? Jess Smith was too. She was stuck on a job that was controlling her life, consuming her free time, and offering little opportunity for growing her pay. Then she found FinTech Mortgage Association, and she never looked back. FinTech Mortgage Association makes home lending simple, and they take care of home buyers like family. Using technology to make everyone's life easier, FinTech Mortgage Association equips each of their loan solutions architects with the tools they need to build a career with a schedule they control, a product they can take pride in, and an earning potential that is life-changing. Unleash your true potential. Join FinTech Mortgage Association. Visit finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com. You're in charge now. NMLS ID 1492187. Equal housing lender.
We're talking about vegetable oils. We're talking about the food guidelines that the United States government has been pushing into our diets for decades. And we're doing so with Tucker Goodrich, who's a nutrition researcher, friend of the program. Dave Lewis comments on our YouTube stream. He says, dropped the seed oils, upped the beef dripping and Kerrygold butter, weight falling off, energy through the roof. So a lot of people report similar situations. But I wanted to ask you, Tucker, while I had you, about this study that came out. They're always bashing on the red meat consumption, and that's fine. We got to look and see whether there's an argument there. They did this study, 20,000 individuals, observational study, and they were looking at the greater intake of red and processed meat is associated with worse heart function. And this is the European Society of Cardiology. And they looked at the cardiovascular magnetic resonance of heart function, and they looked at novel CMR radiomics used in research to extract detailed information. So I'm not going to get into the technical here on a broadcast, but they even adjusted for other factors such as age, sex, deprivation, education, smoking, alcohol, exercise, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, and BMI. So they found that higher meat intake people had smaller ventricles, poorer heart function, and stiffer arteries.
Yeah. So this study, which I haven't read the whole thing, I read an extract in Cath Lab Digest, some cardiologist focused thing. It has all the hallmarks of bogus science. For starters, it's an observational study, so it's one of the lowest standards of evidence, right? They're looking at a bunch of people. They're doing it at a point in time. They're not like following them for the rest of their lives to see what actually happens to them, right? It's not an experiment. They're not giving them something, they're not giving them red meat and watching them drop like flies, right? They're just saying, okay, how much red meat did you eat in the last 5 years? Let's look at your heart function, right? So, from an engineering standpoint, we've already established that it's garbage in,
right?
It's bad data. We know that data doesn't We know this approach doesn't work very well in nutritional science. It's been established again and again and again. Second thing, they're not looking at an actual outcome, right? They're not looking at how many people die because they eat red meat. They're not looking at how many people get a heart attack because they eat red meat, right? They are looking at some imaging things that they say indicate that you might have a higher risk at some point in the future for heart disease, right? Again, hallmark of a weak study. We always want to see a real endpoint, something that we know is an actual cause of the thing we're claiming is causing it, right?
Right.
And my favorite example of this is running. There was another cardiologist here in the United States who did a study looking at arrhythmia, atrial fibrillation, which can predispose you to get a stroke and is, my father had atrial fibrillation, so I'm very familiar with this, and he had several strokes. So, it can definitely be a real health problem. So they looked at runners and they said, oh, look, runners have a higher incidence of atrial fibrillation. Therefore, running is bad for you. Sounds logical.
Right.
Except the scientists at Stanford University, who actually did what's become known as the Stanford Running Study, who looked at runners and followed them until they died, found that runners have half the rate of cardiovascular disease as non-runners do. Running is protective against heart disease, even if you're getting AFib because of running, right? So that's how good research is done. So these guys aren't doing that. They're just saying, oh, we think these people ate this. We think that, it causes this problem in their heart. They mention this, how meat can be turned into this metabolite in the stomach, which is, I assume they're referring to TMAO, which has been, and then they say, oh, fish has a beneficial effect. Okay, this is more garbage science. TMAO is produced in your stomach, when you eat red meat. True. The biggest source of TMO in your stomach is fish. So if TMO is bad for you, then why is it good for you to eat fish, which has lots more TMAO in it than red meat does? Okay. And that's been known for years. So then we get to, then we get to the adjustments, right? You and I don't live adjusted lives. We live actual lives. My favorite study like this, and I literally could not believe that they said this. They said red meat was shown to reduce risk of cardiovascular disease until we adjusted the data. Then it was shown to be harmful.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not adjusted. Nobody's adjusting me.
Yeah.
I'm actually eating something and I want to live, right? I mean, if we look at places like Japan, where meat consumption went up 5 times after World War II, did they start dropping like flies? No, they're the healthiest, longest lived country in the world, and their longevity went up, not down.
Yeah.
So, this one I would throw in the bin.
Well, another myth busting with these science papers, because so much confusion out there, and it seems like all the big money is all stacked against eating, meat and just living a lower carb ancestral diet. A lot of the big money is all stacked against meat, especially. They hate it. They want you all eating plant goop and vegetable oils, and it's sick because it hurts a lot of people. And,
you got to understand, up until recently, the head of the American Heart Association was a vegetarian.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So they're biased. There's a bias here.
Yeah. Well, Tucker Goodrich, it's always great having you on, and I want to let everybody know, if you want to read his great detailed analysis of these different science papers as it pertains to all these different subjects related to diet and healthy living, go to yelling-stop.blogspot.com. That's yelling-stop.blogspot.com. So thanks again for coming on the program.
Thank you, David.
For news, talk, and information. 1040 WHBO Pinellas Park. Tampa Bay's all new News Talk 1040.
It's the only way I get news.
From ABC News, I'm Michelle Franzen. A CDC advisory panel voting to recommend restarting vaccinations with the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 shot. The FDA had put a pause on the vaccine 10 days ago. It follows an all-day review of 15 cases of blood clots in women who got the J&J shot. 3 women died. Dr. Michael Strife of Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine earlier during that review explaining his concerns. Those clots can occur anywhere from the legs and lungs to the brains.
And this is, I'd say, a moving target because we're still early in the acquisition of cases. But so far, it appears to be a thrombotic response.
This story still developing. The president addressing members of Congress next week. The White House says part of his speech will focus on his $2 trillion infrastructure plan. Republicans have sent a counter proposal to the president for $568 billion. Today, Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia met with Maryland Governor Larry Hogan and other lawmakers, hoping to find bipartisan agreement.
I think this is truly a bipartisan effort. We're working in a bipartisan way to put a good infrastructure bill. We can take care of the needs of our country, and we can do it in a responsible way.
In New York, former associate to deceased convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein appeared in court.
Ghislaine Maxwell's attorney entered a not guilty plea on her behalf to a new charge of sex trafficking that expands the scope of her allegedly criminal conduct. Maxwell appeared in the courtroom for the first time in a blue smock, her hair graying at the roots, her ankles shackled. She appeared frail. Her family attorney said she's being treated horribly in jail, and she looks forward to fighting the charges that accuse her of enabling Jeffrey Epstein. Aaron Katersky, ABC News, Federal Court, New York.
A first for SpaceX today, making history when it used recycled materials to launch the Crew Dragon Endeavour from the rocket to the capsule at the Kennedy Space Center. That crew now arrives at the International Space Center tomorrow. You're listening to ABC News.
Do you check your Google search results regularly? You should. People often get their first impression of you or your business online. Negative comments on the internet can impact your life and your livelihood. Take control of your online reputation. Get your free reputation report card at reputationdefender.com. It may reveal negative posts from an ex-employee, upset patient or client, news article, legal issue, or even exposed personal information right there in your Google search results. Uncover what's lurking on the internet about you with reputationdefender.com's patented scan and get your free reputation report card. Or for immediate assistance with your reputation, call 800-401-6681. Our cutting-edge technology helps make your Google search results look their best. Call 800-401-6681. That's 800-401-6681. 800-401-6681. Or take the free scan at reputationdefender.com.
The Russian opposition leader, known as President Vladimir Putin's fiercest critic, is eating once again. Details from ABC's Patrick Reevell in Moscow.
Alexei Navalny says he is ending his hunger strike after 24 days, saying he's accepted warnings from his doctors that he will die if he continues. Navalny's doctors on Thursday called for the opposition leader to stop, saying his blood tests show he could fall into a fatal coma in days. Thousands of people protested across Russia on Wednesday in support of Navalny. There's also been international concern, with the U.S. warning Russia it would face consequences if it dies. Patrick Reevell, ABC News, at the Foreign Desk.
The Oscars are this weekend on ABC. The producers hope it's inspirational. ABC's Jason Nathanson has more from Hollywood.
I'm not homeless.
Will it be Nomadland, the trial of the Chicago 7? We'll find out Sunday night what will win Best Picture at the Oscars. And show producer Jesse Collins says he hopes the in-person telecast will leave viewers with the overwhelming feeling of wanting to return to the multiplex. That after watching, they'll say,
I want to sit next to a stranger and watch a movie. You know, I want to watch all the movies that I haven't seen that these people were talking about all night.
The theme of this year's show, Bring Your Movie Love. We'll see how that plays out Sunday night on ABC. Jason Nathanson, ABC News, Hollywood.
This is ABC News.
Millions are tuning into Newsmax TV and going to Newsmax.com for news. Now, Newsmax is asking if you approve of President Joe Biden, his policies, and trillions in spending. And did President Trump do a better job? Vote in the Newsmax poll. Just text the word FISH to 39747. That's FISH to 39747. Let us know who you like better, Trump or Biden. Vote in the Newsmax poll. Text FISH to 39747. That's FISH to 39747. And watch Newsmax today.
I'm Michelle Franzen, ABC News.
Who is your neighbor? Dave and Wally are team drivers for Oakley Transport. One day, they came across a very serious accident on the highway. Some might pass on by, but Dave and Wally saw there was no time to waste. They jumped into action and saved 2 people's lives with moments to spare. That's the kind of courageous love we need more of today. It reflects the respected culture Oakley Transport develops with their driving professionals. CDLA licensed drivers. Join Oakley Transport today for a rewarding career. Visit oakleytransport.com. That's oakleytransport.com.
From the heart of Central Florida, you're listening to the most electrifying show in media, A Neighbor's Choice. I'm your host, your neighbor, David Gronowski. Welcome back to the program. We are live broadcasting on radio, video stream, podcast. neighborschoice.com is our website. That's neighborschoice.com. And we had a great discussion with nutrition researcher Tucker Goodrich, and we had a wonderful discussion about the origins of the food guidelines and how a lot of it is driven by a lot of ignorance. That's not about science, but about ideology and even religion. And my oh my, has that caused tremendous suffering in this country as so many grandmas switched from butter that they grew up on the farm churning, and then they started buying it once they got it into the supermarket. And then all of a sudden they were told by these so-called experts from on high, get rid of that butter, replace it with industrial vegetable oil called margarine. That'll take care of you. And yes, it did a horrible number on millions of people who right now have very horrible health, chronic illnesses, which are actually the tinder for having a horrible experience with this new virus. So government has created and subsidized toxic seed oils, processed carbs and sugar, which has led to an epidemic of chronic illnesses, even Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. All these things have links to these consumption rates going through the roof. And that was a great discussion. Luca Online says, we elevate factions of society to infallible status. Priests in history, scientists today, and we're surprised when they behave in depraved ways. And JB says, the people that can run tend to be healthy. Unhealthy people can't run, referring to the ignorance that was being talked about in the last hour about health effects of running. Another one, T. Eastman says, peanut oil, is that vegetable oil? Yes, that is. So we are now going to turn to someone who has been known for being a great forecaster of economic events and markets. He was someone who predicted the rise of cryptocurrency back in the 90s with his book, The Sovereign Individual. And he now has a lot of insights in today's situation, as wild as it is. Please welcome James Dale Davidson. How you doing, James?
All right, David. Nice to be with you. I'd like to throw in a little afterthought on your last segment. It's just to point out that it isn't only ignorance. It was crony capitalism that led to the war on butterfat. It was the realization on the part of the producers of fats that if they cooked with butter and they used butter in their products, they'd have to keep it refrigerated. It was expensive. Whereas you could take margarine, industrial oil, as you say, made from cottonseed oil that used to be thrown away, and it could sit on the shelf for 100 years.
Right.
It didn't change at all. And they started, one of the things that came out of it is that Procter & Gamble bought the patent for Crisco, which was initially invented as an artificial wax.
Right.
And they started using it in place of lard all based on bullshit. There was no truth to it.
Right.
They just kept saying that fats made you fat, caused heart disease. There's not really any evidence that that's true. And in fact, in the Framingham study, which was a longitudinal study of the way health habits affect your long-term survival, they found out that one, that cigarette smoking was bad for you. That was true too. But in spite of all the propaganda that eating fat was supposed to make you fat and cause you early death, the actual data that came out of the Framingham study showed that the people who ate the most saturated fats were the skinniest and longest lived.
Right. Right.
So it takes out every moron that believes that you shouldn't eat fat. And you go to the grocery store, you see people buying skim milk.
Yeah.
Because they want to be healthy, not because they like the taste of it. It tastes like nothing.
Yeah. And then
the reason that skim milk became popular was because pig farmers could use it to fatten their sows.
Wow.
Because it made them fatter than whole milk.
Wow.
The whole thing is a crock of crap, guys. But anyway, you didn't invite me on here to talk about dietary nonsense, but it's all part of the world we live in.
Yeah, and it has a big factor in the current pandemic, though, James, because so many people have these comorbidities, the heart disease, the diabetes, the cancer, obesity, all these different things are correlated with the rise of vegetable oil consumption that the government subsidized using our money. They subsidized it, forced it into generations of people's food. And as our previous guest, Tucker Goodrich, says, it bioaccumulates in the body. These seed oils, they're not natural. They're not meant to be in our bodies. And they cause our mitochondria to go out of whack. They cause our, to create oxidative damage in our bodies. And all these things are what causes people to have these lethal experiences with this virus, And so it's connected to what we're dealing with, this massive attack against our freedoms that this pandemic has opened up for governments to exploit,
Well, you look at the whole nature of diabetes, which is such an epidemic in this country. It's closely correlated to the change away from the natural food diet that most Americans had when most Americans were working on the farm. If you were growing your own food, you were not eating this synthesized crap or the high fructose corn syrup.
Yeah.
And I think the oxidative damage is probably implicated in the main, or one of the main drivers of type 2 diabetes, which is the production of sugars in the kidneys and the liver.
Right.
Because most diabetics, when they wake up in the morning, have higher blood sugar than they did when they went to sleep. That's because it's coming out of their kidneys and their liver, not out of their diet.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It's all, it's just like taking a big sledgehammer and pounding on somebody's head. It's going to cause a headache that'll be more than enough,
Right.
The secondary effects and the hidden effects go on forever.
Right.
And they have only begun to start to suss these out. It came from a very evident source, which was the desire of the food production companies to lower their costs.
Yeah.
They wanted to lower their costs. Skim milk. Sure, they like that because they could take the butter fat out of it and sell it for ice cream production and butter or other things. And then they could sell it for a premium price to morons who thought that they should have no fat in their diet.
Right. Yeah, it's a mess. And now they're trying to demonize milk itself and get people to drink these nut milks. And these nut milks oftentimes have these toxic seed oils in them. So they can't, everything is upside down when government centrally plans out what we should be doing. It just creates the worst backwards outcomes you could ever imagine, you know?
Well, what it does, it also, this is something that needs to be borne in mind by your listeners. It's not just that government does ridiculous things or does things that cause trouble. As Bismarck said, nobody should know how their laws or their sausages are made. But it does. Also, it opens the door for these crony capitalists to create mischief and make huge amounts of money by getting government to force people to drink skim milk or not drink milk at all. You know,
right.
The government with its, and you had George McGovern playing such a huge role in the early days of creating the so-called food pyramid that's supposed to inform you about what you should eat. And if people did that, they really got themselves in big trouble.
Yeah.
But if the government weren't there making people subsidize the production of this junk and forcing us to buy it, it wouldn't be done. Nobody would be talking about all this fake science, that the fake news. You know, they did a recalculation of one of the studies that was supposed to show that you had a higher mortality rate if you ate a lot of saturated fats. It was undertaken in Australia. And when they checked the data, they found that there was nothing to it at all. It was absolutely the opposite of what they reported. They just did a study and slapped a conclusion on it that had no bearing or foundation in the actual research.
Right.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And you know, if you think about it, the fat consumption in certain cultures is very high. The Eskimos, as they used to be known when I was a younger man, ate whale blubber to an amazing extent. A huge percentage of their diet was made up of whale fat and the blubber of seals and things like that.
Right.
They weren't fat. They didn't have bad heart disease. And the Maasai in Kenya, who eat basically a diet of blood and what amounts to half and half, very fatty milk. They weren't fat. You'd be hard pressed to ever find a fat Maasai. And you wouldn't know that the Eskimos weren't fat because they were wearing these voluminous clothes made from animal skins.
Right.
If you strip them down, they were skinny.
Yeah.
You know, it's all lies.
Yeah. Yeah, and yet it persists in our time. And I don't understand why people want to listen to what Washington has to say about how to stay healthy, that you should wear 15 layers of masks, that you should stay in the house. They had a Zoom video where Joe Biden was talking to all the world leaders, and he was the only guy with a mask on his face on the Zoom, as if the virus would catch him from the computer. You know, this kind of insanity, it persists so long, and it's amazing. I think, though, and I hope that at some point, so many people who are programmed to go along with this stupidity, this quackery that the government promotes in so many fields, especially the sciences of medicine and health, at some point, maybe there will be a breaking point and people will just say, okay, I don't buy this anymore. Do you think that's possible? I mean, you study human trends for decades here.
Well, I think there is already a certain amount of curiosity, skepticism about what we're seeing in our healthcare system. It's really a sick care system, not a healthcare system, and it has a big crony capitalist function. It's about getting people to become a diabetic or you have even cholesterol. Now that's another one of these idiotic, misinterpreted issues. People think that they have to suppress their serum cholesterol levels, especially by not eating foods that have cholesterol
Right.
This is a grave misunderstanding. For one thing, it helps make you stupid because what is your brain made up of? Lots of fat.
Right.
And the cholesterol is a big function there. Secondly, almost all of your hormones are made from cholesterol. There's the raw materials of like testosterone, which is a big deal to guys and should be.
Right.
Should be. If you have no cholesterol, you can't make testosterone. It's all crazy. Out of kilter.
Yeah.
But we know that, I guess. But I think things will change to some degree. You have many more people today who are interested in alternative medicine. You still have the majority of team if they get any kind of symptomatic distress of their body, they go doctor get prescription. To pharmaceutical diabetic.
James, we're having a little bit of a disconnection with your signal. We're going to take a quick commercial break and return with James Dale Davidson, the forecaster and investor. Back in just a moment, live on A Neighbor's Choice.
Hello, this is David Gronowski with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a sixth-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com, and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR.
Are you ready to transform your career? Jess Smith was too. She was stuck in a job that was controlling her life, consuming her free time, and offering little opportunity for growing her pay. Then she found FinTech Mortgage Association, and she never looked back. FinTech Mortgage Association makes home lending simple, and they take care of home buyers like family. Using technology to make everyone's life easier, FinTech Mortgage Association equips each of their loan solutions architects with the tools they need to build a career with a schedule they control, a product they can take pride in, and an earning potential that is life-changing. Unleash your true potential. Join FinTech Mortgage Association. Visit finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com. You're in charge now. NMLS ID 1492187. Equal housing lender.
A lawsuit is not something that anyone looks forward to. It's a stressful process. There are attorneys in Tampa Bay that keep clients well informed, creating less stress. That law firm is Catania. Personal injury law is defended with full disclosure. There is no guessing game. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania will handle the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't realize they have a claim for the loss until they talk to Catania. They only represent private individuals and treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's their way of practicing law. It's a commitment to you. Remember, they don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to Catania.com. Over 28 years in practice. Catania, personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys. Catania, putting families first.
Office Tampa.
Not attorney spokeswoman. A lot has happened that has prevented us from feeling like a community. Well, now that things have opened up a bit, let's get back to basics. As a foundation for our neighbors and family, God is a big part of bringing us together. It's time to get back to church. Uplifting, supporting, and loving neighbors that are cherished, not only now, but for eternity. Come on, you can use it. The Welcoming Committee is there every Sunday. See you soon.
Neighbor's Choice returns. We're speaking with James Dale Davidson, who is a forecaster, an investor, and he's got a big following in the cryptocurrency space. I wanted to ask you, James, what's going on? You know, everybody keeps, every time I do an interview with you, I get all these people who love crypto. They are talking about you. They want you to talk about crypto. And I'm not really an insider in that space, but I watch it with interest. But, there's so many questions around it. I don't even know where to begin. What's the latest thoughts you have on this crypto phenomenon?
Well, I think it's part of an evolution that is underway in many related areas that involve the breakdown of our accepted, established systems of doing things. And we have, one way of looking at the money issue is that you could say that all money is a reflection of a shared perception of reality. There have been cases when money was made up of various types of shells, brightly colored bird feathers. Certainly gold, silver have been money in many societies through history. The reason that gold and silver have value is because they're scarce. Remember the story about being as rich as Croesus? The King Midas who had the golden touch? Those are myths surrounding the invention of coinage by kings in the ancient Turkey. We have today a Federal Reserve note that's more or less an IOU nothing. It's based upon a central bank controlling the amount of zeros that they can add on to the end of a string of numbers. And that's how Benjamin Bernanke, when he was Fed chairman, described the process when he was asked in a television interview whether quantitative easing actually costs the taxpayers a lot. He said, no, it doesn't cost them anything. We just manipulate the string of zeros,
right.
Add another digit in our computer, and that gives them money. And I think the need in society is not just for an adequate or a huge supply of flexible liquidity, so that when there's coronavirus or something, the Federal Reserve can just say, okay, we're going to add trillions to the money supply. We're going to add all these zeros to the balances of banks and others so that they can spend money they don't have.
Right.
Well, spending money you don't have may be an immediate lift, especially for the people who get to spend it first. But in the long run, we also have an interest in curtailing the expenditure of money that doesn't exist. And that's one of the things that Bitcoin in particular really pioneered, because it has a limited ultimate expansion capabilities. It's not fully flexible. It can't be expanded to infinity. So
right.
That makes it valuable. And, remember when Bitcoin started, people were saying, $10 a Bitcoin. Why would I buy that? It doesn't have any tangible characteristics.
Right.
It's really based on an algorithm, a mathematical algorithm.
We'll take a quick break. We'll continue in just a moment with James Dale Davidson on Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice. Back in just a moment.
Politics these days are just that, politics. Pathetic discussions about things that don't matter while the pandemic, crime, and economic disparity march on. That's why you need a balanced approach to news, business, and entertainment in the state of Florida. That publication is newstalkflorida.com. Whether it's the White House, the courthouse, or your neighbor's house, News Talk Florida has the sources, articles, video, and audio that will be a must daily check-in from your laptop or mobile device. Take a look at newstalkflorida.com. Today's news and entertainment with a Florida slant.
An independent CDC panel's recommended lifting a nationwide pause on Johnson & Johnson's COVID-19 vaccine. Earlier today, the company's chief medical officer, Dr. Joanne Wallstreicher, asked the panel to allow the vaccine to be used again.
The benefits of Janssen's effective, single-dose, and easy-to-use COVID vaccine continue to outweigh its risks.
The one-dose option has been linked to 15 cases of a rare but potentially dangerous side effect, blood clots. 3 of the cases have been fatal. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his wife today received the AstraZeneca vaccine at a pharmacy in Ottawa. The vaccine has not yet received emergency use authorization from the FDA. The White House has announced President Biden's first overseas trip. It starts with the G7 summit in June in England, followed by European Union meetings and the NATO summit in Brussels. A close call for SpaceX's Dragon X as it heads to the International Space Station. Made a close call with some space junk. Daria Albinger, ABC News.
Our Neighbor's Choice returns. I'm David Gornosky, your host, and I'm speaking with Wilmsdale Davidson, who is a forecaster, an investor. He's predicted a lot of the different things that we've seen throughout the last several decades in the markets and in predicting the rise of crypto. And I wanted to let you finish your thought, James, before we had that news break from ABC for those listening live with us on radio. What was, you want to let you were talking about the algorithm behind cryptocurrency like Bitcoin.
Yes, I was going to say that even though it is not a tangible something, it is a something that Bitcoin rests on. And I think that we've just had over the last week an interesting demonstration of the fact that people have lost a lot of the faith that they would have placed unthinkingly in national currencies in the past. We saw the Dogecoin, or the Doggy
coin,
go from something like 13 cents to $48.
Right.
And it was a joke. It was started as a joke. But I guess the joke is on us. We're leaving in the national currencies. They're still worth something, and they will be worth something for a long time. But in the long run, fiat currencies have always gone to nothing.
So is this doggy coin thing? Is that a vote for nihilism when people invest in that, or what is that?
Well, it could be a sign that people have a lot of silly money to play with. But I think that we're going to see ultimately a move away from national fiat currencies, which are all monopoly currencies, to things which are slightly more competitive. And I would say that, in fact, we do have competitive private currencies that are in play but not recognized as that. For example, you can go to Starbucks and get your coffee, and then you can also have a little token, which is the Starbucks affinity reward, and you can use that later to buy more coffee. And there are different forms of this, where private companies issue tokens that are quasi-valuable or valuable for some purchases. And that is something that didn't exist in the past. It's part of the breakdown of the monopoly that government has on money.
Right.
The late Nobel Prize-winning economist F.A. Hayek, who's one of my favorite economists, he liked me. That's one of the reasons I think I liked him.
Right.
He said that competitive money would be a solution in the long run to the problem of inflation and the disagreeable consequences of monopoly money, which we have many of. So I think, yeah, it's here. It's going to ultimately both the gold, precious metal market, and Bitcoin are evidence that people are
I think we lost James Dell Davidson. We'll see if we can reconnect with him. But I do think, what he's saying there is true, which is that you see people moving towards cryptocurrencies. You see them moving towards things that are basically a vote of no confidence towards centrally planned fiat currency. James, are you there? Do we have you?
I'm back, yes.
Yeah, sorry about that. So I want to let you finish your point there about the move away from the dollar towards cryptocurrencies. You see that as a sign that we're having a vote of no confidence to the future of the dollar, right?
And the future of all the government institutions. I mean, if you look at the nation state as a project, a lot of it is in the heads of the people rather than physical form. If we have a constitutional order, we saw a little bit of quasi-violent challenge to that in the January 6th commotions at the Capitol, which we've heard a lot about. But it's not alone in its challenging nature to the old system.
Right.
People eventually lose. All of these systems in history have lost their salience as underlying conditions changed, and people found something else that they could do. When the Roman Empire fell, it had already been teetering for a long time, and it had almost fallen in several instances before. And what happened was that people sort of preparing for the fall of the Roman Empire had moved away from depending on the trade networks to affiliating themselves with some wealthy landowner. And that's how they became serfs, or they became part of the feudal system that grew up to replace the ancient world. I don't know if we're going to have a new feudalism. I once thought that in one of my books. I said we're going to have electronic feudalism coming along. I'm not sure that was right, but I do think we're going to have people providing ad hoc solutions to the problems that the government is not going to be able to resolve.
Yeah. One
of the things we got. Sorry, what?
Go ahead.
I was going to say that in the catalog of problems that the world faces now, one that continuously shows up as a high risk problem is inequality of income and wealth, which I'm not sure is anything apart from it, just a consequence of the way that technology has amplified the ability of some people to make a living while reducing the value of unskilled labor.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest underlying factor.
And of course, how much resources government takes up for all of its spending programs also paralyzes people from having upward mobility in the market, and having.
Definitely does. And one thing if you look at the 19th century, which is a period when there were robber barons and there were a lot of people who made a lot of money, the poor people, the people who were working for a living, had the advantage of money on their side instead of against them. Because if you earned gold dollars and you put them in a sock, or under your mattress, put them in a bank and you could pull out gold dollars, the gold dollars became worth more as time went on rather than less. So the compounding of the change in value of money was advantageous to the unskilled in the 19th century because we had a gold-backed money.
Yeah.
And it became worth more and more. Now the dollar's worth less and less.
Right.
So you've got the Red Queen effect that Lewis Carroll talked about in his novel Through the Looking Glass, where Alice is talking to the Red Queen, and the Red Queen informs her solemnly, well, in this country, you have to go faster and faster to stay in the same place.
Yeah. Yeah. I have this quote here from you. I don't know which book it was in. I just saw it online. It says, other things being equal, the more widely dispersed key technologies are, the more widely dispersed power will be, and the smaller the optimum scale of government. Is that a quote that you feel is playing out in our time today, or are there some other factors here that are not coming into play?
Well, there are always other factors, but I think it's definitely true that there are a lot of destabilizing technologies that have been developed and will have consequences that are not necessarily those that were intended by anybody. They just tend to have that effect.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to see eventually we'll see a breakdown of large systems. I think that, the European Union is a construct that has served some good functions and did create a free trade zone within Europe. And it may have reduced the chances of war within Europe. Remember, in the 20th century, we had 2 horrible wars in Europe that brought the whole world into a very bad way. But today, the optimal size for a political operation is probably about the size of Singapore or Hong Kong.
Mm-hmm.
Singapore, when Lee Kuan Yew became prime minister when they achieved independence in Britain, had a per capita income that was a bare chemical trace of that in the United States. And he kept trying to make the system sensible. He decided, after having gone to school in England, where he got a first-class degree at Cambridge, not to have socialized medicine, but to have a system of forced savings where everybody had money taken out of his paycheck. That money was put into his own account that he could spend and give to his family.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, the people who were spending the money had choices about how they wanted to spend it. Singapore is right on the equator, more or less. And a lot of people wanted to have air conditioning in their hospital room. So if you wanted to have air conditioning in the hospital room, you had to take it out of your own purse, not out of somebody else's. And lo and behold, a lot of patients decided not to have the air conditioning because they wanted to keep the money.
Yeah.
And it mobilized incentives in a rational way. And I think, that was one of the reasons he was so successful. By the time he left, by the time he died, Singapore's per capita income was higher than the United States.
Right.
So the growth capabilities are really high. And these small mini states almost uniformly have very long life expectancies because they tend to have effective medical systems and high income. So the smaller the better is probably the rule.
Do you see an age of decentralization emerging in America? I mean, a lot of people are coming to Florida in droves to escape the heavy-handed lockdowns and nanny state policies of New York and California, New Jersey and Michigan and so forth and so on. People are coming to Florida and saying, hey, maybe this is a new bastion of liberty, a renaissance of respect for private property and some educational freedom, some respect for people's health freedom still intact here. Do you see Florida being a hub, or is it Singapore or bust, huh?
No, I think Florida, things happen in degrees. There's a long legacy trail on what happens in a society. So much of it depends on what happened 5 years ago, 10 years ago,
right.
100 years ago. And we're not going to just suddenly become Singapore, even if that is a somewhat better way of organizing, or more efficient way of organizing a society. Because one of the problems we have, which we see in the increasing partisanship in Washington, is that the different factions in society are very hard to reward. A political program that works for subsidizing sugar farmers is not going to be a big appeal to the candy makers. There's going to be a conflict of interest in those things.
Yeah.
And we see that all the time, that you've got these green agitators who are so hell-bent to mend the climate. They think they can control it. I'm not sure they can. I've done a lot of research on the history of climate. Anybody who's studied geology has done that as well. And it's just untrue that people driving their cars around side streets cause all of the climate change that we've seen in history, because there were no cars for most of this time.
Mm-hmm.
The climate kept changing anyway. It didn't stop. There wasn't just a flat, this is climate, and now we're going to amend it, change it to do something else. And we're talking about spending trillions of dollars with these readjustments of the whole infrastructure of energy, which is the most important input in an economy.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about how energy is supplied and how its waste products are taken on.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have a modern economy without a lot of energy. If you look at the number of horsepower, BTUs, that were expended in an economy from about 1860 to 1990, the number of BTUs in place in the American economy utilized increased by 4 million %. That's why we had a richer economy, and why we still have a richer economy than we did 150 years ago.
Yeah.
But if you had to go back to having people do things by hand, most of the people living in the world today would starve to death.
Yeah.
It'd be a massive wipeout, because the capability, the energy output, somatic energy of muscle power, the average man is about 10 horsepower per annum. You couldn't get much done on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you want to know why we're so rich and why we get so many things done is we have 4 million% more energy applied to the tasks of life than used to be the case. We don't think about that. We don't really understand it. And I'm sure Biden doesn't understand it.
Mm-hmm.
He's on this hobby horse of, well, we've got to clear the air of carbon dioxide, which is total rubbish. You know, I admit to anybody who doesn't like marijuana that I don't necessarily like marijuana. I don't use it, but I have invested in it. We had a marijuana production facility, and one of our main expenses was piping in CO2. Why did we pipe in CO2? Because that makes the plants grow faster and bigger.
Yeah.
And the same is true of the ambient CO2. It helps trees grow, it helps crops grow, and without it, fewer things would grow.
Yeah.
And we're much closer to the lower level of necessary CO2 in the atmosphere than we are to some huge overflow of it. It is possible to have an overflow of CO2. Look at Venus. But that's where the atmosphere is almost all made up of CO2.
Yeah.
Here, there's only a bare chemical trace of CO2 in the atmosphere. So if you feel like popping a champagne bottle, by all means, go ahead. The extra CO2 that gets out of the bottle is not going to change the world.
Yeah.
It's very, very, very reminiscent of what people used to think when they thought the Earth was the center of the universe. The sun revolved around the Earth. You may remember that. They all thought that that God had set us up so that everything revolved around us. Everything doesn't revolve around us. It still doesn't. And the idea that small amounts of CO2, bare fractional amounts of 1%, could be the driving force for climate in the world is ludicrous.
Right.
It would be a joke if it were so serious.
Right.
Because, I mean, where does the energy for the Earth come from? The sun. It comes from the sun, people.
Mm-hmm.
It's not coming from CO2. CO2 is at most a kind of like a blanket on your bed. If you're in a freezing spot, the blanket is not really thick, you're going to freeze under it. CO2 has some effect,
right.
and it mainly has effect in terms of altering the rate at which photosynthesis occurs. Photosynthesis is the nature of the ultimate foundation of all life on Earth.
But Bill Gates wants to blot out the sun a little bit. Did you see what he wants to do?
That's totally idiotic. Totally idiotic, because basically what you're doing is putting all the future of civilization, it's like going to a roulette table and saying, let's put an equivalent sum to the national debt on 36 and roll it and see how it works out.
Yeah.
Because if the theory is wrong, the whole world is going to be in a hell of a mess. You know, another thing that they never explain, there's so many things about this so-called global warming that make utterly no sense, and which are never explained or even addressed, is the fact that, you know, we now have our space probe in Mars. You read about the news that the helicopter flew for 30 seconds or so off the surface of Mars. An amazing accomplishment, I'd say. The people who did it should be applauded. But while we've been monitoring Mars for some years, we found out guess what? That there was global warming on Mars during the same time that there was the great global warming on Earth. Why was that? Because they were getting radiation from the sun, the same place we get it. It's all just common sense.
Right.
And you look at the ice cores that they have, and where the paleoclimatic records have been stored for thousands of years. As far back as those records are available, they show the same patterns of warming and cooling, same patterns of CO2 rising and falling in the atmosphere, because it's put into the atmosphere not only by people, by cows belching and by people driving their cars, it's also put into the atmosphere by volcanoes, natural processes. And that atmospheric CO2 tends to rise after temperatures go up. It doesn't cause temperatures going up. It's an effect of higher temperatures. So I'm pretty much a skeptic of
We got about a minute.
climate change.
We've got about a minute left, but I wanted to ask you, do you have any forecasts? You talked about things happening 5-10 years down the road. Is there something you see coming around the road economically that you'd like to share with us in this last minute? Or
Well, I think we have to be aware of the fact that we're headed for a bad climax to a breakdown of the system. We had a period of American predominance, which was extremely beneficial in the U.S., and we achieved the highest standard of living the world had ever seen. And that's on the way out. And we see it fraying around us. If you look at the different indicators, we talked about money and other things. It is something which is unmistakable. It's not going to keep going the way it has been going in the past. That era of history is over. And the question we have to think about is what replaces it. I'm not confident that it'll be better than what we've known, but I'm pretty confident that it's on the way out. And we have to be ready for it. Think. People tune in to David's program next week and the week after and listen.
Well, very good. I always enjoy talking with you, James, and I want people to go to your website, strategicinvestment.com. That's strategicinvestment.com to find more about your newsletters, your information that you've got, your different books, strategicinvestment.com. Thanks again for joining us, James Dale Davidson.
My pleasure. Have a good one.
Very good. And that's it for today's A Neighbor's Choice. Folks, remember at 8 p.m. tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern, we'll debut our new Things Hidden film. That's Things Hidden 4. That'll be on aneighborschoice.com. That's aneighborschoice.com. So check that out. And don't forget, it'll also be available on YouTube. Just search for David Gornosky, subscribe there, and you'll be able to watch the film as it premieres tonight at 8 p.m. Fascinating kind of documentary series that we continue to develop together for our audience. So you don't want to miss it. Great discussion, some familiar faces you'll see, and I think you'll really like it. So I look forward to hearing your feedback. And email me hello@aneighborschoice.com. That's hello@aneighborschoice.com for guest suggestions, for comments, questions, and feedback from our show and the films that we put out. Again, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. And remember, it's about personhood, not collectivism. We're tired of that stuff. We've got to go to a new future. I'm David Gornosky. Godspeed.